Greetings, the Old Patrol HQ podcast. Today we have a very special guest, and the conversation is going to be a bit different. Shaun Frederickson is a creative designer and co-visionary of F3, an initiative with First Liberty Institute. In July 2021, his viral speech against lockdown sparked a movement in Southern California, leading to the Freedom Revival events. Shaun has collaborated with PragerU, InfoWars, Epoch Times, Turning Point USA, and many more, and now he's slumming it with Old Patrol HQ. I first met Shaun at a meeting in San Diego hosted by Volunteers in Politics. I was invited to speak by KimYeater of Take Our Borders Back and Dran, Reese, the president of VIP. And I would have gladly yielded my speaking time to Shaun if I'd known what he was going to say. Did you know that the number one favorite Supreme Court case in America, used like a baseball bat to pound Christians into submission concerning our religious freedoms and liberties, Lemon versus Kurtzman, 1971, was recently overturned in 2022? You're going to be forever changed by what you're about to hear on this podcast. Come join us. Good afternoon, Shaun, and welcome to the Old Patrol HQ podcast.
It is a pleasure to be on here, Gil. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to tell you, when I first heard you, and what had happened is I had gotten invited by KimYeater and Dran, Reese to go speak at the Volunteer in Politics monthly meeting. I was there to talk about the border and border security and all the ins and outs of what's going on there. But I heard you got called up and you did an update on the Supreme Court and the law of the land and what's really going on. And I'll tell you, I would have rather have given you the rest of my time to speak, to have you just speak on that for the next hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And it was just so eye-opening, so impactful to me. I never forgot it, which is why after I left there and as soon as I was able to get the time, I wanted to invite you on so that you can just educate all of us, America, or as many people that will listen to this podcast, on the true nature of what's going on in the Supreme Court, in litigation across the country when it comes to religious freedom, and how American Christians are not as hamstrung, as muzzled as we think we are.
Yes. Oh man, this is such an incredible topic, Gil. I am so honored to be able to just spend time discussing it. I think too often we as Americans, we're bombarded with this negative news. And obviously fear sells just as well as sex sells. And so we have a lot of us that are aware of the damning consequences of what sexual sin can produce, but we don't realize the damning consequences of the fear that it will produce. And unfortunately, too many Americans aren't aware of the wins that we have currently across America. For example, I think this is important to pay attention to, right? Let's look at Louisiana for a moment. The Ten Commandments is now in elementary, middle school, high school, and every public university. So all of the schools across Louisiana that are publicly funded now have the Ten Commandments hanging in all of those schools.
Really?
And we all ought to look around and wonder, how is that possible? We're seeing the calamities around America, the riots and the protests, but how does that happen? And if someone is willing to get curious for a moment and really ask that question, then we will discover the many wins we've had in the past few years that would set up the state of Louisiana to have the authority to pass that piece of legislation and sign it by the governor because of what's taken place. And that's really what I've been doing the past few years is I want to know what's really going on. We all know that fear sells. And the mainstream media is going to try to scare us because when we're afraid, we're much easier to manipulate. Think about you're in a car accident. And when you're in that car accident, you're in this fight or flight mode. You're very tunnel vision. So if you had a salesman that came up to you while you're in this fight or flight mode and say, "Hey, man, would you like to purchase this emergency system that'll help you in this moment's notice?" You'd be much more apt to say, "Yeah, dude, whatever will get me out of this predicament, I'll buy it." The ambulance, you don't think about the cost of an ambulance when you need it. You just get into it because it's an emergency service. And I firmly believe that the media today is trying to keep us in this state of fear,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, we're buying into it. And so I want to take a step back and look at the wins. And it's been really beautiful because I think looking at the wins gives me a plan for 50 years or 100 years and how we can build as Americans and kind of get out of that fearful rhetoric. So,
Let me just pause you
yeah,
there for a
go
second
ahead.
because interestingly enough, right, when you have an accident, going through your analogy, and by the way, that was the perfect intro to the subject, by the way, which I
Yeah,
expected no less from you. And I do want to hear before you really get started on just a
yeah.
little bit of your background
Oh,
and
sure.
what brought you to this point. But the analogy of an accident is, I had an accident one time where I wrecked a trailer, and I remember I thought I was fine. I thought I was fine. I'm like, I'm okay. I can drive the rest of the way. I'm good. And the driver of the tow truck said, no, no, just come with me because I need you to help me guide. So he knew he wasn't going to talk me out of driving, but if he could talk me into doing something else, I would do that. I was like, okay, yeah, okay. So I'll go with you so I can guide and someone else can drive. After a few moments, I started to shake in the car and I started to get so shaky and so upset because shock was coming in. And
Yes,
honestly, I think America now has experienced so much trauma in regards to religious freedom, in regards to religious persecution. In the case of currently, we see it in the world stage. Christianity getting mocked, and not just Christianity. I mean, it was.
yes,
I don't know
very
what
much
you think. It
so.
was a demonic
Yeah,
display.
absolutely.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. I
We're on
want
the
to
same
discuss it a little
page.
bit later.
Yeah,
But America is in shock. And when you're in shock, you're not capable of thinking straight. You're not capable of functioning properly. You can't make rational, good decisions. And you're at the mercy of whoever comes along, like you said, and decides to influence, to sell, or whatever.
that's right.
So, with that
So,
start, give us a little bit about you and your background and
yeah.
what's got you doing this kind of work.
Yeah. I'm so gracious to who the Lord is in my journey. I got saved when I was 19. I'm 35 now. I have 4 children and a beautiful wife. My life,
What?
perfect, dude. I
I
have,
thought you were still in, dude. I thought you were about to graduate high school. Oh my
I
God.
get that frequently.
Uh,
And funny, my wife and I, when we had our second kids, my wife she's young too, like fountain of youth. We've just been living next to the river for a long time. And my wife and I, we have 2 kids, and we're at a friend's house, and this young couple comes up. They've just got a baby, and they look at us and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we had a baby in high school too." My wife and I were so thrown off because we got married when we were 23 or
yeah,
22, 23, and then we slowly started having babies, and we just
yeah.
look young, man, and we have joyful spirits about us, dude. The Lord has been so gracious to us that I'm constantly in awe of him, just in the blessings, man. And my journey to where I am today was really led the long way around. I Photo video is my trade. Photo and video production in Los Angeles. I started with commercials and advertising, short films in Los Angeles, very much bootstrapping it, trying to find anybody that would teach me how to do the trade. So I fell into the arts. I was living in
Hmm.
Los Angeles by hanging out with obviously liberals and people who detested God. So it was kind of pushing me in that direction. And I ran into a Christian videographer, and LA is interesting because in the city of Los Angeles, it is so taboo to be a Christian. So you have these churches, and the church that I attended had a Christian group that was creatives, right? So a church had a creatives group that would meet in the basement of the church before church would start, and it's all these executives from like Sony and all these really, the
What?
production studio. Yeah, they would all meet in the basement, and they would like, hey, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, let's talk about our faith. It was so innocent and beautiful, but there wasn't this ability to openly live out your faith in Los Angeles because it's such a pagan society.
So literally a couple thousand years later, you're in the catacombs again.
Yeah,
Dear
very much
Lord.
so.
Wow.
Yes. And we're talking, this is at a church, right? So there isn't, it's such, looking back, it makes sense what we're getting out of Los Angeles because the leaders of the studios are so fearful of expressing their faith because they know if people know that they're Christians, then they will be ostracized. So they just go along with the vile content that's continually being produced.
As so many of us have.
Precisely. And I think this is the time that we as Christians need to be educated on our history and to know theology as well as to know history about what is
Agreed.
the church? Like, who are we as Christians? And really, my time in Los Angeles led me to understand how ignorant I am of Christian history, of apologetics. How can I defend my faith? If somebody comes up to me and they say, all right, what does it mean to be a Christian? Can I give them a strong case for the faith and the historical significance of it,
Yeah.
the evidence that proves archaeologically what it means to be a Christian, and the proof and evidence that all Christians ought to know? And then can I break down my theology, my eschatology, my hermeneutics, my lens of as to which I view? And I couldn't say yes to that stuff. So I bring that up because my time in Los Angeles was pushing me to become more progressive, even though I'm attending a church and I'm hanging out with the Christians in the basement that are creatives. I'm still becoming more progressive. Luckily, I met a creative who was an outspoken Christian, and he urged me to go on a missions trip where I traveled the world for a year. I ended up seeing the Philippines and a lot of Asia, a lot of
Man.
Africa,
Yeah.
and that really challenged my worldview. So I come back to America, I meet my wife, we get married, and I challenge every Christian man who is trying to find his self-worth and like where he fits in the puzzle of the world to get married and have kids. Just stop aimlessly wandering, get married, deal with your insecurity, and have lots of babies because that will make you a better human being. And that's exactly what it did for me. It made me challenge my insecurities. It made me figure out, look into history and hermeneutics, theology, eschatology. And luckily, a few years into my marriage is when the presidential election of 2016 took place.
Hmm.
And that moment woke up many millions of Americans, and I happen to be one of them. And being an artist and a creative, I know how narratives are crafted.
Yeah.
I know as a photographer, if I have a brand that's in front of me that's like a fashion brand, how to make the model look a specific way to make the her apparel look most appealing to the viewer.
Yeah.
So I started seeing my trade leveraging the perspective of people around the world. And it started making me wonder, this seems quite nefarious. And so that led me to asking questions, and then it led me to reading. So I ended up, you want to tell, let me tell you how stupid I was. Okay. I didn't know that you could go to the library and pick up a book that was written in 1700 and understand it.
Really?
I was so LA dumb. I didn't I thought that the old English that we read from like what's his name? The old English I'm spacing it. He wrote Romeo and Juliet and
Ah, Shakespeare?
Shakespeare. I think my mindset was so public school educated that anything between, 1500 and 1800 was Old English, like Shakespeare, like the thous and
Yes.
King James. So what I wanted to do is like, okay, if it's complicated, let me find it and I'll figure out how to read it. Well, dude, I just picked up Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, and I started reading it, and it felt like I was reading a note from a friend. And reading it was like, oh my God, this is what we're encountering today. And I need more. So it led me to reading the Federalist Papers. It led me to reading the Declaration of Independence and understanding that this is not. So we're frequently told that the war at hand is all about economics. Well, when you read the Declaration of Independence, and if you read the first version that Thomas Jefferson put together, where he made mention of slavery being an issue, yet it was omitted because some of the states weren't willing to sign on to the
Mm,
Declaration of
hmm.
Independence if he included slavery. So when I read that, I begin to realize my whole worldview is wrong. And it led me to inquiring and investigating and taking ownership of my understanding. And that curiosity had
Yeah.
really led me to a position where I wanted to get away from mainstream ideas and really start taking that responsibility of educating myself more seriously.
And you bring up such a good point, and that's such a great testimony, by the way. History. We tend to dismiss history as a dusty old book in a dusty old library that only,
Yes.
just, scholars will go and read. And the
Yes.
thing about it is, Shaun, that I think that people forget that the gospel and the history of the church extends not just the 240 years of this country, but 2,000 years,
Yes.
right? And then the gospel has gone through civilization after civilization after stage and stage and stage and stage in history. But Christian Americans today are convinced that we're at the climax of history in America, that this is the worst it's ever been in the history of the planet and ever will be again. And they don't realize we're babies. The gospel has been here 1,800 years before. And if we don't go back there and understand that everything we're reading and seeing now already was dealt with one way or the other in the past by
Right.
Christians who managed to keep the gospel alive and our faith so strong that 2,000 years and later, you and I got saved by
Yes.
that same message, right? That 2,000-year message. We're not
Yes.
the crux of history or the crux of the world, for that matter, are we?
Oh, that's such a great point. And it is a beautiful reality knowing we're not on an island.
Yes.
Not the first Christians to encounter this. And Christians before us have strategies to overcome evils that we're observing.
Yeah.
For example, Sam Rutherford. I have a book right here. Sam Rutherford wrote the book Lex Rex, and he wrote it in 1644, and it was about addressing the evils in society in Great Britain. And he's a Christian that is well known for having the ability to articulate complicated issues and
Hmm.
what they're running into. And Lex Rex is Latin for the law is king. And that was mind blowing. Yet that is exactly what we're running into in America today, where we're seeing the Biden administration or Clinton's or whomever, they have a law that they're able to live to, and then everybody else is living to this other standard.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Sam Rutherford was running into when he wrote Lex Rex, because at the time it was the king is the law. And he said, no, 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 the law is the king. And it was revolutionary. And the law was backed on biblical realities and
Mm.
biblical truth, and forcing all people to be submissive and respect that law is his message. And that's what Christians today are really trying to find a way to articulate. But we're so afraid to lean on our Christian truth and the Christian heritage because for 50 years we've been bombarded with TV shows and radio and music that is mocking the Christian faith, saying, oh, you believe that there's a guy in the clouds that created everybody, and you think that these two people were made in the garden, and they mock us so we don't feel comfortable leveraging the truth that we know to be truth because we don't want to be looked at as being ignorant or childish or petty. And we're not taking the time to really get a historical or archaeological or a fundamental or even a theological understanding of our own
Yeah.
ideas. So we're submissive. So we submit to the Big Bang Theory and evolution because their science seems to be more deeply rooted because we're not.
Agreed. Agreed. And one of the things I loved about your testimony is that you literally had to break the bubble of where you were. You were
Yeah.
surrounded. You were just being bombarded. And if you stay there, I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now.
Right.
But most of America, Shaun, is in that bubble. They have not traveled the world. They have not stepped out of that bubble to see the reality. They think that everything that's happening is simply happening to them, to each individual. And there's no help out there. There's no help coming. There's nowhere to turn. And we just simply believe, it's like a person who begins suicidal ideology.
Yeah,
They have to isolate themselves to maintain it.
that's right.
And if you, the moment you step out of that, or even one human contact, one human act of compassion or kindness will reduce the threat of suicide by 75%. So you
Wow.
have to isolate yourself to maintain that ideology. And I think cell phones and a bunch of the media and things like that have succeeded in isolating ourselves so well that we are not willing to even step out beyond that horrible, horrific bubble we've put each one of us in.
Yeah.
And even though communication wise, we have expanded exponentially beyond belief, I could talk to somebody anywhere in the world in seconds.
Hmm.
We are more isolated now, I think, positionally, spiritually, intellectually than we've ever been. What do you think?
Dude, you are over the target. There's a book that was written by Neil Postman. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death,
Mm.
I believe is the title of it, or something like that.
Neil
And-
Postman?
yeah, Neil Postman. And it's great because he breaks down before the telegram, before the telephone, before the internet, before the newspaper, we only cared about what we could see. Human beings, when you see something catastrophic, you do something. So let's say you're walking down the road and you see a man come upon an elderly lady and steal her purse and run away. When you see that, especially as a man, there's something that the Lord put within us
Mm-hmm.
that it compels us to action. So you see that guy, you see the victim, the woman that was just attacked. You do something. So you start running after the guy. You don't know her, you don't know him,
Yeah.
but you just do it because that's who we are, right? Well, that has been suppressed because we have been so entertained by that type of activity.
Yes.
So we get on our phones and we see the crimes take place on Instagram, and we follow these accounts that regularly show a little old lady being mugged by some stranger, or you see a store being broken into by a bunch of adolescent teenagers that are just stealing all the jewelry. And if we observe enough, then it will reduce that normal human reaction to react, you
Yeah.
know? So I believe that we are sedating ourselves because through a form of entertainment where it's causing us to be more apathetic in our neighborhoods. And the reason our neighborhoods are getting worse isn't because of the government. It's because of us.
Mm. Oh,
The
that
government
hurts.
isn't what made our neighborhood prosperous and beautiful. We did.
Yeah.
Citizens did. The roads, the architecture, the natural setting of the cities that we live in was done by private citizens. Most of the beautiful things in our neighborhood was established by a private citizen with an idea, and maybe they had to go persuade the government to do it, but the government doesn't make beautiful things.
No.
Citizens do. The government doesn't do a great job protecting rights. Citizens do. And I truly believe that if we would pull our attention back from being entertained by clickbait media, that we would have the ability to slowly begin to restore our neighborhoods. And if we would focus locally, and then from there, we would gradually work our way up the system, we could restore this republic and give it 15 or 20 years, but we absolutely have the tools in place to do it. Just think about this. Think about this for a second. We're all familiar with the Boston Tea Party.
Yes.
We all know that Sam Adams and John Hancock were these two wild rebels, and Sam Adams is one of my favorite characters in history because I see him as this like quick-witted revolutionary, and I love him. because I think it was probably his idea and I don't know the story well enough. Maybe somebody that's watching this does, but I think of him as being this guy that's like, you know what? Not only are we going to jump on the boats because they tried everything, they did everything to get the captains to leave the harbor. There were like 10 ships that came into the eastern seaboard there, and they convinced all 10 of them, except for this one in Boston, to return to England with the tea that they had, because they were essentially saying that they're not willing to do commerce with England with this new tax, right? Well, the one in the Boston harbor wouldn't leave. The captain was, I don't know, leveraged by the ship owner, and they weren't willing to leave the harbor. So 30 days they had to get this ship, figure out within 30 days, they had to figure out how to get this ship out of the Boston harbor, and they couldn't get them to leave. And so the law in that region was, if a ship is still there, everything on that ship must be removed after the 30-day window. And so they were coming up on the 30 days. They were negotiating with the captain, they were negotiating with the ship owner, but they couldn't get that ship to leave the Boston harbor. So on the 30th day, Sam Adams and John Hancock, they organized allegedly 5,000 men to gather and address this issue. They didn't have the newspaper, they didn't have the telegram, they didn't have the telephone, they didn't have Instagram, they didn't have telegraph or telegram. You know, they
Just tell a friend.
they just had the local tenacity to get the job done, and they did. They changed the course of history because
Yes.
they're willing to do something uncomfortable. And that has been lost because of convenience and entertainment through, worldwide politics.
Yeah.
Paying attention to, what George Washington wrote in his farewell address was not to entangle ourselves in foreign affairs. Care about local. Don't engage in European affairs. Don't engage in African affairs. Don't engage in Middle East affairs. Take care of America and America first. And I believe that if we were to refocus our attention on America first and ensuring our local communities were dealt with, then we would have security and prosperity once again in America. And I'm not going to say we don't have prosperity, because we do, but we just need to rein it in. And it starts with our own houses first, and then you go to your church, and then the church goes to the city, and the city goes to the county, and the county goes to the state,
Yeah.
and you work your way up.
Well, we've been poisoned by our own prosperity. We
Yeah.
have been blessed, but how have we used that blessing to just upgrade ourselves, not to upgrade our society, our culture, our communities, or anything else? And not that everybody's doing that, but unfortunately, Shaun, the memory of Sam Adams has been reduced to just a great beer.
Yeah.
And so he's been reduced to just entertainment, when the lessons that we could have learned, that we can learn. And I'm a big fan of going back, and I'm watching like the story of George Washington. I'm watching all these things to refresh my memory,
Come on.
because I was taught those things in school, but at the time that wasn't important to me.
Yeah.
But now, an old man, 60 years old, right, twice your age, I feel like I'm a novice. I'm just a helpless kid right now that has to go back and relearn all those beautiful lessons, so
Yeah.
that I can begin to apply them and not feel like, because yes, I have convinced myself as a man, by the way, I'm a law enforcement officer. So I've had the benefit of the training to be able to keep that instinct. If I see someone, I'm not going to sit there and just film someone getting their butt kicked or film someone getting beaten or robbed. I am going to act, because that's just in my DNA now.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're right. We see video after video after video of a man filming a woman getting beaten, and you can just sit there and film it.
Yeah.
That turns my stomach. But your point, and I want to get to your point, because you're just making me burst at the seams right now. I mean, I think this is going to be one of hopefully many messages, because what you're saying right now is just, if it does to everybody that listens what it's doing to me right now, I can now, I actually believe the true spiritual, godly revolution can happen. But
Mm.
And hell, I just lost my train of thought.
No,
So
that's exactly right. There is a godly revolution that can take place, just like the one that happened here in America. There's a few books that I'm currently kind of going through. Light and Glory is another one that's really great. And this book, I think it's called Light and Glory, 1492 to 17 like 92, something like that, or 89.
okay.
And it discusses how America came to be. How did this country become so biblical? And if we don't know our origin,
Hmm.
then it doesn't take a whole lot to push us over. If our foundation is so weak, then any strong breeze will push us over. Think of a palm tree, how tall a palm tree is, yet it can endure a hurricane because its roots are so deep. And
Mhm.
that's what a Christian ought to be able to emulate. So I think that we need to know our Christian heritage in America if we desire to preserve this republic. So a good example with Sam Adams and John Hancock again is Jonas Clark. We all know about Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride.
Right.
And we visualize this guy on his horse, but where was he coming from and where was he going?
I've never asked.
Why? It's such a strange thought. We think the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming. But who's he warning? It's
Yeah.
a strange reality. And I believe that was removed, that important answer was removed from our history because if we knew, then it would equip us with tools to do the same thing. So he was writing from the Green Dragon Tavern, which is where the men would all gather and share ideas. They would discuss what's happening on the shores and strategize how to protect themselves and secure liberty. Where he was writing was to a pastor's home by the name of Jonas Clark. And Jonas Clark happens to be the community leader because he's the pastor at the local church. And most pastors are obviously well educated in history and science and in government and civil affairs. And so Jonas Clark is going to forgive me, Paul Revere is writing to Jonas Clark's home because Jonas Clark is protecting two revolutionaries,
Oh,
John Hancock and Sam
Sam
Adams.
Adams.
The government, England, wants to go and deal with these two rebel rousers. And these two men are being protected by the local Christian pastor.
How about that?
And Paul Revere is writing to go meet with the pastor to say, you better get the guys out of there because they're going to come kill them. They're going to come steal their arms. They're going to come deal with those guys. So what does the pastor do? He calls up the boys, sends the message out. What does he go? I don't even know how you do that in 17,
Yeah.
was it 74, 75? I don't even know how you do it, but he did. The Minutemen were the community leaders, the community men. He calls the Minutemen in April 19th, 1774. The shot heard around the world, or 75, the shot heard around the world takes place because of Christian men realizing it's our duty to protect our neighborhoods. We don't delegate our responsibility of being a father to the government, do we? We
No.
don't delegate the responsibility of protecting my house to the government.
No.
Why would we delegate the responsibility of protecting our town to the government or our community or our county to the government? Yes, the
Or our
government has a
nation.
duty of securing our rights and protecting our
Yes.
rights. But the Second Amendment was established before the local police department was. The first police department was, and you'll have to check me on this, but I think it was 1835, the first local city police department. And I
Okay.
believe it was Boston or New York City. It was one of those had the first police department. So this was like 50 years after the Constitution was established. In 1780, God, a lot of dates I'm thinking. 1780-ish is when the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation was established. So we're talking 60 years, right? 60, I'm terrible at math. 50 years after the country was established, the first local police department was established, the
Okay.
first city police department. The sheriff was there, but the sheriff leaned heavily on citizens to help. There
Enforce.
was this expectation of a citizen has a duty, and that has been dramatically lost in this
Oh,
push for communism. Communism is essentially the idea that the government will deal with all capital. Like I think it's funny when people say capitalism is terrible because communists love capitalism. They love
Yeah,
it. They just
for
don't want
them.
you to have any capital. They want to have all the capital, right?
That's it.
Communists want to own all the capital and they want to own all the authority of protection. Well, the opposite of that is a republic where we have the ability to engage in capital. Anyone and everyone has the ability to engage in capital. And then we also have the ability to defend ourselves. So they both come with a responsibility. And this leads perfectly into the Supreme Court cases that I'm bringing up
Yeah.
because they all started with local citizens seeing something evil and doing something about it. And
Yeah.
that is what it means to be an American in a nutshell,
Oh,
having
so good.
morality, righteousness, and conviction to do something. When you see evil, we are obligated to do something.
Wasn't it Alexander Solzhenitsyn that said, "When America stops being good, it will stop being great"?
Come on.
But
So
I want to make one quick statement and a comment, and then I do want to launch into the Supreme Court. And because one of the biggest things you said was, you encouraged all of us to, man, be vocal, speak
yeah.
about God at your schools, at your work, and feel comfortable knowing that the law is on your side. But would you say that, okay, so many of us, including me, have advocated our responsibility, our civic responsibility to our country. But isn't it because of the root faith and intellect of our founding fathers that we've managed to survive this long, even after we've kind of deserted many of those principles in the last couple of decades?
Oh man, that's so well said. Yes. I think one of the things we often forget is the founders invested much of the time that they were meeting in the Continental Convention researching and sharing about what they know about other countries and other nations that have tried and failed. And so they
Wow.
spent so much time trying to discover what works and what doesn't. And they put together a system with so many checks and balances that even the most vile government like what we have is struggling to dismantle it,
Yeah.
which is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I look at the American system much like a well-built naval ship. So if you go into the hull, right? And I'm not a naval guy, but you go into the hull and they have all these stopgaps. So there was a ship that burned here in Coronado, and I guess it burned after they disembarked, and some fire takes place, and the whole ship gets monumentally destroyed. And I was talking to a man who flew in to assess the damage and repair it. And I asked him, how the heck does that happen? And he said it happened from it happened because they didn't do their job right. If if a ship is managed properly, there are so many stopgaps where there's corridors, and every corridor is intended that when a fire breaks out here, it stops because the corridor is locked.
Yeah.
And then
Isolated
the
there.
next
Yes.
corridor is locked, and the next corridor is locked. And so they're expecting there will be damage in one of these corridors of like 50, but we can repair the damage in the one corridor when it happens. Totally fine. As long as the rest of these are locked. And what I see the government today is doing is they're trying to open up all these corridors to destroy the ship. And our duty as
Yes.
citizens is to go and lock the corridors because we expect damage. I can expect damage in the city council. That's one city of 800 in
Yep.
California.
Yep.
Totally fine. Or we've got what, 53 counties in California. So one county going bad, totally fine. But there's 50. We check each other. Each county is checking each other and challenging other counties. But when we fail to check the corridors, then the whole ship will sink if we're not doing our job. And I think we just have to carry locally and check our local cities and hold them to ensure the stopgaps are checked
Yeah.
because that's the authority we have, and we have that ability, and we can do that.
Yes. Wow. That analogy is like pure gold, pure gold. So let's talk about
Yeah.
the whole idea that Christians are not as hamstrung and handicapped and muzzled as we think we are in this country at the moment.
I love it. How often have we heard the statement that, man, if 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 we could go back 50 years and change that court case where we could pray in schools again, America would be wonderful. Well, the past 2 years, we've had that ability. But did you know it?
No,
So
I
we
only heard it a month. I only heard it about a month ago.
we're constantly fed fearful information. And when good things happen, where do we find it? Where's the outlet that's just telling us the victories and the wins so that we can take that information and put it to use? For example, First Liberty Institute just won a case against the Navy. The Navy mandated the vaccination of all naval service members. And about 4,000 service members said, you know what? I'm a Christian. That goes against my religious conviction, and I'm not willing to sacrifice my religious conviction for that mandate. No, I won't. This is wrong. And they stood even though they were penalized for it. Some of them were dishonorably discharged for it. And they stood the test to the point where this past week we settled with the Navy, the Department of Defense, and First Liberty Institute won this lawsuit. And the Navy servicemen who were willing to stand against this hardship were vindicated
Mm,
through the tenacity of standing for what is right. But how many people know that? How
no.
many people know that the Navy SEALs who stood through the continual bombardment, that they were going to lose their retirement if they didn't follow through with this edict? Those men won this week, and that's great news.
Wow.
And we
Yes.
need to be it needs to be more common to share the wins so
Yeah.
that we can be encouraged that we are winning. We are taking ground. And one of the big wins that we all need to be aware of is Kennedy versus Bremerton. It's a Supreme Court case that happened in 2022 is when it was solidified. And Coach Kennedy, many people are aware of Coach Kennedy because he's the coach that got fired from Bremerton, Washington. He is employed at the local high school as a football coach, and he was a former Marine. He sees the movie Facing the Giants after he's retired from the Marines. He sees this movie Facing the Giants, and when he sees the movie, he's compelled to go and do something and invest in the youth somehow, in young men. And in that movie, the coach praised the 50-yard line. And so he says, you know what? I'm going to do that too. So he makes an agreement with himself and the Lord that he's going to pray after football games, win or lose, home or away, he's going to pray. And long story short, the Bremerton Unified School District fires him because he's praying after these football games. And he decides that he's going to stand up as an individual, as a man. He's going to stand up for his moral conviction. And this is what we need more men to do. Stand up for what you know is right. Win or lose, you do it because this is our job. And so he is strung out. He loses his job, and it takes a few years to go through the court system. And First Liberty Institute is defending him. And many people often say, I would, but I just can't afford. And I think when we look at the potential consequence of hardship, think of it like this. Let's say you're that man who's walking on the sidewalk and you hear a woman screaming and a baby crying, and you see a house that is engulfed in flames. If you go with the thought of, dude, I can't run in that building because I have to work tomorrow. Or I can't run in that building because if I hurt my leg, I might not be able to deal with the financial loss. Or if I go in that building and I ruin my shirt, that's $50. I'm going to have to figure out how to compensate. That is preposterous. when you see a time of need, you just do it and you run in the building. And you don't think about the consequences after the fact. You're like, I can't believe I did that. And I can't believe I lost my shirt. And I can't believe I sprained my ankle. And I can't believe the consequences, but you deal with them. And luckily, Coach Kennedy was willing to endure the consequences and the hardship that he endured for
Yeah.
the number of years, because the benefit that he acquired was that he changed American history, because he was willing to stand up to a an unjust termination, that
Yeah.
it changed the course of our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, where when he won in the Supreme Court case in Kennedy versus Bremerton in 2022, that court case went back 50 years to a Lemon v. Kurtzman. In 1971, there was a Supreme Court case that has been cited 7,000 times in the past 50 years, removing religious liberty. So the person that says, man, I wish I could go back 50 years and change that court case, that has happened in
That's done.
1971 when Lemon v. Kurtzman was ruled on, essentially saying that a government person cannot express their religious beliefs. That court case was overturned in
Jeez.
2022. So now we as individuals that are working in government, and we as individuals that desire to put up 10 commandments placards in schools, Louisiana, can.
Wow.
We
That is
have the ability.
breathtaking.
We can talk about our faith. We can express our religious convictions. And another good one. So in 1971, Lemon v. Kurtzman was ruled upon removing religious liberty from Americans. Well, that case was cited in 1981 with Stone v. Graham. Stone v. Graham was in Kentucky. There was a Ten Commandments placard that was in the school, and in some atheist organization decided to sue this school district because they didn't want to have to look at the Ten Commandments monument, or a Ten Commandments paper. A paper is like a 11 by 17 paper with the Ten Commandments on it. And I ask people, which of the commandments is so offensive? Is it respect your mother and father? Is it don't
Yeah.
murder? Is it don't steal? Don't covet? Like, which one of these is so offensive? I don't know. Is it resting on Sunday, which
Yeah.
everybody loves resting on Sunday, the Sabbath? Like, praise God,
Yeah.
dude. You know, like
Yeah.
so 1981, Stone v. Graham, Ten Commandments in the school. Well, what case did 1981 Stone v. Graham cite for the justification of removing that Ten Commandments monument or Ten Commandments placard?
Lemon B. Kurtzman.
Lemon v. Kurtzman. So every single case that was standing on Lemon v. Kurtzman now has no standing. So they're that palm tree that's not rooted now. You
Yeah.
just got to push them over. You just got to challenge them. Every Ten Commandments monument that was taken down can go back up. Every single one of them
Wow.
across America. All we have to do is get educated and get informed. You have all these people that are saying, well, separation of church and state. Well, do you have a defense for that? Do you know what the defense is for separation of church and state? Do you know what that separation of church and state letter, what it came from? Do you know that it was Jefferson writing it to the Danbury Baptist Church or congregation, letting them know that you have so much religious freedom? Don't worry, there's a separation. There's a dividing wall where the state can't limit your religious expression. Do we
But they
know our history?
turned
But they
it.
manipulated it. Yeah, they flipped it on its head. Now they're telling the churches and the Christians, "Oh, separation of church and state. You're not allowed to express your religious conviction as a city council member, as a school board member." But let me tell you, let me give you hope, you person who are a city council member or a school board member or a county board of supervisor. You have all the right in the world to pray and express your religious conviction, because in 2022, it's all about the historical precedent of America. It's Lemon v. Kurtzman was destroyed. And now it's on the historicity of America. And if you know your
Oh my
American
God.
history, you know that every colony, almost every single colony, was built on a Christian denomination. The Quaker state. Why do they call it the Quaker state? Pennsylvania.
The
Because
oatmeal,
it was
isn't it?
founded. No, it was founded by William Penn. Yeah, oatmeal. Yes, William Penn. Exactly.
Oh, you
You're
got
right.
me so
Exactly.
fired up right now. So
Yes,
fired up. So
precisely.
just a quick example, right? So
Yeah.
Jesus is talking to Peter, right?
Yes.
Who do you say I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the
Ah,
living God. Because
come
upon
on.
this rock of this statement, I will build my church.
Amen.
And the gates of hell
Yeah.
shall not prevail against it.
Amen.
Almost as if it's somehow gates are going to attack us, but that's not what Jesus is saying. It says
Amen.
we can attack the gates of hell and those gates won't prevail against us. But
Mm,
somehow we have flipped that script, haven't we?
well done. Oh,
Like
dude,
we're
that's
just succumbing to the gates.
come on. So well said. The defensive posturing with the church is it's difficult to deal with. The founders of this country believed that this nation, if we can establish it properly, will produce hundreds of years of liberty and a religious framework for the opportunity for our children and our children's children to have an opportunity to worship God safely. And unfortunately, we're in a position now where a lot of people in the churches, they're talking about the gates of hell destroying this country. They think
Yes.
the gates of hell are an army marching toward us, but it's unfortunately not true. It's that
Yeah.
mindset that's destroying America. It's
Yeah.
are we willing to grab the tools and do the work in the garden? Because if you had a garden that's overrun with weeds, are you going to go out and say, those weeds, it wasn't those weeds, and complain about the weeds?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
man, you'd be a fool.
Yes. Yeah, no, we have succumbed to that thinking. And here's what you said a phrase that I really like, a religious framework, right?
Yeah.
Because I think any mature Christian and even our forefathers who started this country understood one thing that forgive me, the quote in Psalm
Mm,
escapes me, but it was the writer Asaph who said, "The farther away I got from you, God, the
mm,
more bestial I became."
absolutely.
And we are a nation of beasts that simply consume, 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 consume. And we're so rabid. We're like that. I remember when I was a kid and I had a little kitten and it got on the table and there was a pile of ground beef, raw ground beef. And as soon as the cat smelled it, it jumped on it. We're
Yes.
trying to get that cat off that red meat and he wasn't having it. He bit
Yes.
and he scratched and he cut us all up and I saw the frenzy demonic. I mean, this cat wanted that red meat and he wasn't going to get separated from it. And I kind of feel like we've become a nation of
Yes.
rabid, raging, consuming, give me what I want. And the farther away we've come from God, the more bestial we've become.
Well said. That's a great analogy. My God, I see that. I see that very much so that we've lost the guards of self-restraint.
Yeah, well, that's well put too. I'll tell you, we probably should, put this particular podcast to a close because it is so power packed. And my friend, I'm telling you, if I could and I'll give you the final word, but let me just say this. I saw it in you the day I was there at Volunteers in Politics, and I'm seeing it in waves right now. The faith, the joy of your faith, the passion of your conviction comes off in waves. I'm blown away by it. And, I'm a patriotic man. I mean, I even got the hat. But you, my friend, it comes off you in waves. And I need like a million of you to just overrun this country.
Man, I'm just optimistic and grateful.
You are.
I believe that the Lord has created us for such a time as this, that we are on earth for this time, and that we are, it's we are so lucky to be chosen to do the work. and we're invincible until the Lord's done with us. So you might as
Oh,
well enjoy it.
oh my God, have we forgotten that? Have
You
we
know?
forgotten that? Oh, in our final moments, I do want to thank Dran Reese and I do want to thank KimYeater for inviting me there so that I could meet you. What you brought today to just my mind and my heart and my spirit has been invaluable. And I hope we can do this again.
Yeah.
And I know we haven't covered all the bases, but I think everything that just what we have done today should be just something that is so magnificently eye-opening and spirit, you know, quickening of our spirits, of our dead spirits. So I leave you with the final word, and then we will close off for this podcast.
Well, I just want to encourage your audience to take a little time researching the founders. You know, who is Augustine? Who is Constantine? Who is Tyndale? Who is Wycliffe? Who's Benjamin Rush? Who's Jonas Clark? And the influence of this country and the framework of Christianity that was established. I think that that curiosity and that understanding that America is not just like influenced by Christianity, but it was built on Christianity. Look at all 13 colonies. You know, I touched on the Quaker state. That
Yes.
was William Penn, who was a Quaker. Or look at Maryland, that was a Catholic. Maryland, it was a Catholic colony. Or New York, I believe, was Anglican. And you know, every and many. And don't forget either that when we're challenged with something like an atheist or someone who's a secularist or a leftist who's just angry and foaming at the mouth and they oh, separation of church and state, you can ask them a question like, well, if the separation of church and state is real, then why is it that in Pennsylvania, if you were to be sworn into any of the three branches of the legislature or the executive or the judicial, why did you have to make a oath that you believed in God the Father, Christ the Son, and the inerrancy of Scripture? Because that doesn't seem like a separation of church and state. Or why is it that the U.S. Congress funded the printing of the first Bible in America? You know, that doesn't seem like the separation of church and state. You know, there are many tools that we have if we're curious to look into the founding of the country or even public education, where we have these the primer, the New England primer. They would talk like the alphabet in the New England primer was all biblical. A was for Adam and Eve, and you know, B are beast and carnality. It was every single one pointed to scripture. And remember, in public school, the first level of education, they had to understand the Westminster Confession.
Oh,
So they
oh,
would memorize the Westminster Confession. And so let us not be such easy palm trees to push over.
amen.
Let us dig deep. Let us like make them work if they're going to push you over, because I believe we have a lot more capacity than we think. We're much more capable of getting educated. Old dogs can learn new tricks. And I'm hopeful for the next 50 and 100 years of American liberty, because I know that with technology, we can inspire and educate a beautiful revival and awakening here in the United States of America.
Oh, well said, my friend. Well said. It's been a joy and a pleasure and an honor for me to sit and have this conversation with you. And I am going to have to also do a lot of deep thinking about my life and my situation as well so that I can do better. So thank you for
Amen.
that. Blessings to you, blessings to your beautiful family, and keep up the good work. And if there's any updates you ever might have that you think we should know about, we can do a 5-10 minute, just let people know, because again, this information is not getting out there. We're not hearing the good news. And I have more questions for you in regards to the Supreme Court stacking and Supreme Court and all that kind of stuff, but
Oh
we're going to
yeah,
save that for later. Okay.
that people need to be aware of that. Yeah, the court reform
Yeah.
and the court packing, those are very concerning, without a
So
doubt. We need to be aware of that for sure.
next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, bro. Bless you. We'll talk soon.
Take care. All right.